Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament in the book of Acts, looking at the start and the establishment of the church. And today we're going to look at the persecution that scatters the believers. And this is a short section; it's 3 verses, so it's not a lot that we're going to dive in today. So a little bit shorter video. If you watched yesterday's video, you know that we saw where Stephen addressed the council, and at the end of that, he was stoned and killed. And Saul was one of the main ones there that oversaw it, and well, we think may have oversaw it, but at least he definitely, we know he approved of the killing there. And so we're gonna read this one again. I think this will be a short one today, and then we'll finish it up. So what we're looking at here is Acts 8, chapter 1, verses 3. 1b kind of start in the middle of it, but we'll see here. It says Saul was one of the witnesses, and he agreed completely with the killing of Stephen. A great wave of persecution began that day, sweeping over the church in Jerusalem, and all the believers except the apostles were scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria. Some devout men came and buried Stephen with great mourning. We're going to look at that and why that was put in there and why it was controversial. But Saul was going everywhere to destroy the church. He went from house to house, dragging out both men and women to throw them into prison. So we see Saul here again. And so what we have here, this scattering, this dispersion of the believers throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria was similar to an earlier dispersion that we saw of Jews throughout the world. But this one actually led to the fulfillment of what we saw in Acts 1:8, that the gospel would go to the end of the earth, right? And so this is a start of that. And so there's some good that actually comes out of this persecution. It scatters the believers. They're leaving Jerusalem and they're going into the rest of the rest of the world. And so it's a good thing that while they're doing that, it's bad that they're being persecuted, but it's good that they're spreading the message of Jesus to the rest of the world. And so what we see here in in verse 2 is that godly men came and buried and mourned deeply for him. You're like, well, why is that a big deal? Of course they would, right? Well, one, this confirms Stephen's righteousness, but two, the mourning part of this, and the reason that the mourning is put in here is because that implies that there was a defiance, and it was actually a considerable risk of retribution. And so Jewish tradition here allowed the burial of executed persons, but discouraged lamentation, or what we would call the mourning period and stuff like that. Basically, you were allowed to bury him, but we better not see you mourning and really going on, just having a real fit, I guess, if you want to say, over this death, right? Because then that you basically show that you're agreeing with this person. And so this was kind of a no-no, right? You're not allowed to do that, and so they didn't want to do that. And so they were defiant in, kind of in the face of these people that were persecuting him in the Sanhedrin and court here in doing that. And so we then again see in verse 3 the third mention of Saul in 3 paragraphs of the Bible, right? And so there's a foreshadowing here. There's a foreshadowing of his role, right? There's a reason why Saul's being talked about. And, we're going to get into chapter 9 next week, and we're going to see the reasoning why, and we're going to see the conversion of Saul and him becoming Paul. But it foreshadows the role he's going to play and his narrative that he's going to have in the Old New Testament, when the one who is the persecuting becomes the apostle and then becomes the persecuted. And that we're going to see. And we also know that, for the most part, Paul wrote most of the New Testament. And so there's just a lot of information, a lot of what we get about the early church comes from Paul. And a lot of his theology. I mean, there's a lot of theology that comes from the writings of Paul. We know, we're going to look at this a little bit more, but we know that Paul served under one of the most well-known rabbis at the time. Paul was very educated. He knew the Old Testament. He was probably one of the foremost experts of the Old Testament during that time. And so this was why Saul viewed Jesus as a false Messiah. He did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah, because him, like a lot of the others, right, misinterpreted what Jesus was going to look like, who he was going to be, and what it was going to be like when he came to save them. And so he believes that the followers are heretics, both men and women. And so he's bent on destroying the church. He's bent on going and to him, these people are destroying his Jewish religion. It's just, like I said, they put the word heretic in there. They're a bunch of heretics, and they need to be taken care of. And so that was, he felt very deeply, very strongly about that, and he was very committed to what he was doing. And we see that. And then we're going to see that On the flip side of that, he becomes very committed to the Christian faith. Probably one of the most committed that we see in the New Testament. And so, there's a reason why Jesus picked him to be who he was, and we're going to look at that. But this is kind of what we see here now. Tomorrow we're going to see Philip. It kind of shifts from this, and then it shifts to Philip preaching. We're going to eventually see Philip and the Ethiopian. That's going to be Sunday of next week, but we're going to have a little bit of a shift here, and then we'll shift back to Paul and really catch up on his story and then kind of see how he becomes a Christian there in chapter 9. So I hope you're enjoying these. Hope you're learning a little bit from them as we go through. Like I said, I know there wasn't a ton in today's, but sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of a break, and especially when the day before was an entire chapter. So enjoy it. I hope you learned a little bit from it. As always, I appreciate everyone who tunes into these, takes the time to watch them, comments, shares them. I really appreciate y'all sharing these. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, do so. We're doing a daily study. We upload a video every day, and we hope they're helpful. And as always, I really appreciate everyone who watches.